Tonight I smoked Salvia Divinorum for the first time. It was a light and gentle beginning. I held space with my sweetheart, deck chairs out on the deck in the dark, had everything ready, purchased a small water pipe and the salvia at the local smoke shop, I think all of $30. And this is my gratitude for the abundance of plants, the abundance of the gifts of our goddess, our globe, our ecological organism, the dance between molecule in the body out there and molecule in the body in here. So what was the big message for me? First of all, my deep gratitude to my wife, Jen, for holding space. Having done a little bit of research, it was nice to know that if something did come up, if I had an allergic reaction, that she would be there. There were no big flashes. It was hard to hold the smoke in. I am not an experienced smoker. There were no big visions and time travels. Rather, a golden being entered through the lens of imagination. And I say the lens or the doorway of imagination because it's very much like a euphoric energy. An energy of abundance presented itself. It presented itself as a feeling. It presented itself as a distinct and new sensation in my body. And opening the door of imagination and seeing what converged with that energy, we find a golden masculine presence. Now, the masculine presence that I saw was kind of like a somewhat tainted bronze that you might find in the gold or bronze of a medieval painting. Even some of the angels in the old 15th century, 16th, 17th century, where you kind of see a certain kind of a halo or something of that nature. It had that kind of a feel for it. Now, in my language, these are just masks that present the energy, much like words, just sounds, but through the meanings, through the energy in the sounds, the energy comes forward. And so, while I do not know exactly why this energy presented in this way, or if the energy didn't present first and this was just a comfortable reference point that helped me make sense of it, it was not a portkey-like experience being spun off helter-skelter into another world, which I'm grateful for, because the energy was magnificent. And in fact, as I would strip away some of the architecture of imagery, to see, well, what is it that you're representing? It's this kind of core, luminous, golden yellow liquid light. Why not give it a nice medieval angelic presentation? So this was the presentation of the energy. This was the feeling, and it was about abundance. Now, by far the biggest insight was that this energy of abundance is in stark contrast to my presenting energy, to my identifying energy, which I was able to place and kind of fall backwards in time to find at 2 years old. Now, I don't honestly know how many of the trip journeys that I listen to on YouTube or on Audible where people talk like this are as subtle as the experience is or was for me. When I say falling back in time, this is more poetry, rather, as I'm very present to this intense terror, this intense loneliness, this intense scarcity, and wondering, where is it coming from? And feeling the perfectionism in a 2-year-old infant that is not being connected with, that is not being attuned, that is not being loved, that feels absolutely distraught, that feels absolutely inadequate, that is waiting to be hit and waiting to be punished again. The terror and scarcity of that 2-year-old, of that 4-year-old, of that 5-year-old. The loneliness, the unending shaking in that energy does not fit into the radiance, into the abundance of the essential self. So we have a doorway through which the essential self washes through the psyche, moving, meandering through the layers of time and space, sanding, smoothing, clear coating, glowing the psychic terrain of the past that has been so traumatic, so thick with terror pre-language, that like a fish that does not know water, there's a part of me that until I smoked the salvia and felt that doorway of abundance, that I hadn't had a signature without fear in my body at that level and in that way. And there's a way. There's a way that as that energy came in and touched and caressed my presence, and having those two side by side, in the low back, the terror, the smallness, the terror, in my solar plexus, the panic, the helplessness, in the larger sense of self in my head and my heart, this sense of abundance, this sense of yes. Black and white, oil and water. Now, what I'm still learning is how to blend, how to connect, how to relate to the two. What is the architecture of fear? I'm sensitive to the fact that, from the time I was 15, 16 years old, reading Norman Vincent Peale, Success with a Positive Mental Attitude, using that material to go out and create business and to create possibilities for myself and so many things, building my first house at age 23 and on time and on budget and exactly what I liked. And, there's beautiful successes and expressions of that abundance. But the emotional energy behind it was always terrified. And so the expansiveness in the mind, the self-discipline of goal achievement, etc., could propel my physical reality further and further out in front of the terrified 2-year-old child that Norman Vincent Peale didn't suggest focusing on in Success with a Positive Mental Attitude. It's always about the future, always about what's coming. Don't focus on the past, etc. And yet, in that absence of focus, the 2-year-old remains frozen, the 4-year-old remains frozen. So I do not fully know. The architecture of the psyche, the optimal sequencing, the optimal ratio, is it a 70% positive, 30% healing and looking at the negative? Do you do deep bursts of, looking and discharging that negative energy of fear? Is it best to move that fear into anger, and do more raging at the incompetence of a culture and a parental network that's like, how can you do this to a generation of infants? I do not know. The only thing that I know for certain from this journey is the wonder of connecting with a sense and saying, yes, this is who I wanted to be. This is who I am. This is who I will be when those terrified, small, hurt, lonely, shrunken, helpless, and shaking small parts receive the love that they need, receive the acceptance, the graciousness that they have always needed, receive the gratitude and the safety that perhaps I can now give to them. Because when that terror is replaced with this love and this care and abundance, then the older parts, the 7-8-year-old manipulating parts, the 10-year-old guilty and shame parts, the 12-year-old sulking and the 14-year-old suicidal parts also can dissolve. They're all based on this framework of these paralyzed, dissociated, traumatized infant selves that have not been tended, have not been honored. There's been no witness. There was no witness with my parents. There was no witness with the church or anything around me. There was no witness for the terror of a shame and a violence too difficult for an infant to bear. So he can't go in there alone. He requires a compassionate adult witness to go in there. And I don't trust therapists because I watch how easily they shatter. I watch how defensive they get in this terrain and that terrain. I watch how quickly they watch the clock. I notice they don't volunteer to dive into these deep terrains. And many do not take responsibility for their incompetence or, I've done $150,000 in therapies and healings and all of this. And so I've gotten to know 30 or so personalities, and I don't trust therapists to know what they're doing, to have the primary interest of the client first at all times, to know what they don't know, to do what it takes to go in there and create that safety. So one of the big questions is, do I trust me? Do I trust the energy? Yes. But what about my relationship with that energy? You see, because one of the things that I sense that has been going on in the last couple of years with deep pain being re-traumatized by a therapist. One of the things that I sense has happened is that I've gone from this dissociated older part of myself to this dissociated, terrified part of myself. And now I'm on the other side of the wall where there's a partition between those two, where the dissociated adult does not want to own the feelings of helplessness and horror and trauma of the child. And where when I'm in the child, I don't feel like a powerful adult. I feel completely walled off by all the adults around me, which was my experience as a child. And so there's this split. And so a lot of me has been in the wound, has been in the walled off, in the dark place that this culture doesn't want to look, but wants to carefully wall up and wall off the children in those lonely places. Pretend they don't exist. Bribe the child to explain that there's nothing there. Disown, punish that child, and create the socially acceptable surface persona, the adaptive persona. Can carry on growing over here with the envy, the rage, the bitterness, the hate, the hurt going on behind those walls. That this is a very big split within our culture. Because it's within our culture, the culture asks each individual born into the culture to make the same split, to participate in the same lie, in the same delusion. So this is a little bit of the larger terrain, and I do not honestly know. This is just work in psychology, work in the body keeps a score, and doing the trauma literature and research and inner child work and stuff. I do not honestly know. And I think that it's valuable. It's valuable to be in a state of not knowing. This is the feminine domain, the uncertainty principle, the unknown, the spontaneity, the vulnerability of not knowing. Something that is deeply shamed in our culture, particularly for men. Why do men drive around endlessly without asking for directions? Because it's so shamed in the chauvinism of the cult to say, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not certain. But I'm going to do it anyway. Coughing definitely came up a few times. What I'm most grateful for, what I take away, is an awareness of this golden abundance, is an awareness that that's where the seat of power and majesty comes from. That it takes an enormous amount of energy to constrain myself into the wound, into the terror, into the frozen level where I'm absolutely desperate and I can't risk this because then you might not like me and then you might punish me. This is a 2-year-old's terror. But when trauma does not get resolved, it often freezes at these very young ages, and the world is not viewed as a powerful game board in which to create and partner with reality. It is viewed as a terrifying place where if I do anything wrong, I will be punished by 30-feet giants that behave erratically, that don't understand, that don't attune, that don't get how hard I'm trying to be perfect, that don't understand how lonely it is to get up every morning and not know what's happening and not know what the boundaries are, not know when I'll be hit, when I'll be hurt, when I'll be alone, when I'll be lied to. How terrifyingly lonely that is for that hurt, traumatized child. And the sadness that this abundance, this energy that's waiting like a vortex to condense in the body, is pushed away in the societal structure that does not welcome this truth of abundance. The truth that we have always had more than we could possibly need. That there is an abundance of everything we need around us. And to see and to feel that abundance is to pierce the illusion, to pierce the veil of scarcity in which the people around us don't see, don't have access to the sight, to the reality, to the energy that is so full and rich. So just blessings, the gift, the beauty, letting that light come up and through, not knowing how to work with it. This is something I'm learning. This is something I'm receiving. I honor the gift of the unknown. Through the energy of abundance, letting in the trust of the unknown. The trust that a terrified and traumatized infant cannot have. So the grace, the gift that I can have that trust in the unknown. Salvia, Divinorum, a doorway into the abundance. And I love listening to the stories of the Mexican shaman working with salvia as a goddess plant, connected in their paradigm with the Virgin Mary, in my paradigm with the goddess of the earth, with the waters. A goddess plant, a divining plant, a blessing plant of the feminine. And I'm just so grateful. I'm grateful for my work with the channel Lazarus around this aspect of understanding the misunderstood feminine. So that as I come into this terrain, I at least have some conscious reference point within the context of a frozen body that's never fully freed itself from that fear. Never really felt its head stuff. So a lot of what I'm doing is, I think, integrating and having some commerce between the body that's never lived all of these philosophies, all of these meditations in many ways, but has the head knowledge from 20 years or so of metaphysics and healings and meditations and seminars and all of this stuff and hundreds of books, and has the head knowledge, but doesn't have access in the ignorance of a trauma illiterate culture that doesn't teach us how to unfreeze some of these muscles. I've been literally holding terror since birth. The gift of, for a few moments, allowing the grace of a plant to come into our bodies, into my body, and give me a reference point of what it might feel like to really be myself, to be the person that's waiting to be born, that waiting to be integrated and owned. As soon as I can release, heal, love, care for the parts that are frozen in the past and therefore cannot let it go.